everybody, and thank you for joining us for this emergency briefing from the MirYam Institute. We meet, unfortunately, in rather tragic circumstances. There's been a dual terror attack that has taken place in Jerusalem, adjacent to Jerusalem buses. Obviously, this brings back horrific memories for all of us regarding difficult periods in Israel's recent past and recent history. For the purposes of today, we want to thank all of you for listening in, and we thank our panelists. We're going to begin with our in-house analyst at the MirYam Institute, Mr. Yaakov Lapin. I'll be introducing him in just a moment, but in order to give a little bit of context, unfortunately, one of the victims of these two attacks has been pronounced dead, and his funeral is underway, if not completed. A 16-year-old yeshiva student by the name of Arya Shupak, who is a Canadian national, was killed by way of this terror attack, and 22 other people were hurt in the attacks, some of whom are in serious critical condition. I'm joined today by Yaakov Lapin. As I mentioned, he's an Israel-based military affairs correspondent and analyst. He provides insight and analysis for a number of media outlets, including Jane's Defense Weekly, which is a leading global military affairs magazine. And he does the very same for JNS.org, which is a news agency with wide distribution among Jewish communities in the United States. In the past, Yaakov worked as a defense correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, and he's also a research associate at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies at Bar-Ilan University, and a frequent guest commentator on international television news networks, including Sky News and I-24. He's also the author of Virtual Caliphate, Exposing the Islamist State on the Internet. He earned his BA in Politics and Modern History from the University of Manchester, where he and I first met as students, and he earned his MA in the History of International Relations from the London School of Economics in the UK. Yaakov, thanks very much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. I wish we could be under better circumstances.
Absolutely. I'm sure everybody feels the way that you feel. Look, Yaakov, a senior officer said that police were hunting for an organized terror cell that detonated two high-quality, and I'm emphasizing that phrase, high-quality explosive devices at two bus stops near the entrances to Jerusalem on Wednesday morning, this morning, killing one and wounding more than 20 others, as I mentioned. Speaking to reporters, Yaakov, the head of the Police Operations Division, said that the two high-quality, powerful explosive devices caused a high level of damage and were hidden behind the bus stop and in a bush. The first explosion, for context, occurred close to the main entrance of Jerusalem in Givat Shaul, shortly after 7 o'clock in the morning, which is a peak commuter hour. And the second blast occurred shortly thereafter at 7:30 a.m. this morning at Ramot Junction, another entrance to Jerusalem. So Yaakov, I'd like you to tell us what's meant by this term high quality when describing these bombs.
Well, since Israel has been under a terror wave, which has oscillated in intensity going up and down, but the majority of the attacks that have gotten through Israel's defenses have been of the unorganized manner, either very small localized cells or individuals acting on radical incitement and ideology, and picking up a gun, going on a car ramming attack, a stabbing spree. Those are the kinds of attacks that we have seen again and again, tragically. This is different. This is a highly organized attack. Only a terrorist cell, a well-funded terrorist cell with access to organizational capabilities, the ability to manufacture explosives, and the ability, apparently, to detonate these explosives with a remote control from a distance. All of these point to a different kind of attack, a different kind of threat. And just to give you a little bit of context, just from the start of this year, the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence agency, has thwarted 34 explosive attacks of this nature, as well as other kinds of attacks. More than 300 shooting attacks have been thwarted, and so on and so forth. So usually these attacks are stopped by intelligence, and this is the one that slipped through.
So I heard from Ron Ben Ishai this morning on the news. He's obviously the military correspondent for Ynet. He's a storied military correspondent in Israel. something of a man of somewhat legendary status. And he's also a good friend of the MirYam Institute. And he commented that he believes that these bombs were the handiwork of ISIS specifically. Now, I believe that you have a different perspective on that. What's your assessment of who might be responsible for this?
So I'll start by saying that when we're assessing and asking questions about who might be behind this, everything we say has to be under a question mark. Ron Ben Ishai might well be right, and this could be an ISIS cell. Or alternatively, my suspicion, and again, this is under the headline of a question mark, is the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And the reason that I zoom in on those is because the use of remote control explosive devices has been something that the PFLP has gained a lot of expertise in. And only a few days ago, there was an attempt to set off a car bomb, and it looks like it was a remote control explosive in the car by the PFLP, a flag of that terrorist organization, which is a mysterious and small terrorist organization, but every once in a while, it strikes with deadly force, usually in the West Bank, but it has tried again and again to strike in Israel as well. And also in 2019, they were able to launch a deadly terrorist attack in the West Bank, which resulted in the murder of an Israeli teenager, a 17-year-old Israeli teenager. So they have a long history of remote control explosives, and that's one of the reasons why their name just popped in my head when I read that one of the suspicions was that both of these explosives were set off by remote control. Again, I'm putting all this under a question mark. Of course, the Shin Bet will be leading this investigation together with the Israel Police and the IDF. And I believe that, within a few days, we will have more concrete information about the identity of the attackers.
So one of the aspects that's interesting about this, and I'd prefer not to have to speak to, but I think it's important that I do, is that this has taken place obviously in the wake of recent elections. And we often see an uptick in terrorist activity following Israeli elections. Typically that emanates from the Gaza Strip, though by no means exclusively. And we find ourselves awaiting a new government in Israel. Can you tell us whether or not that has any correlation to these recent attacks?
The first thing I would say is that, when you look at the number of foiled terrorist attacks every year, the number is so high that it becomes immediately clear that whoever is in power and whichever government is in charge, there is an ongoing immediate terrorist threats facing the state of Israel and Israel's civilians. So clearly, that is completely independent of whatever government is in power, and the security forces, are facing the same numbers that they have been for the last several years. Now, it could be that on top of that, there could be added motivation by terrorists to try and send messages to say, if a more right-wing government takes power, they are not deterred by that, and they may have that extra bit of motivation. But I would caution about attaching too much importance to that, because again, when you just look through the numbers, hundreds and hundreds of terrorist attacks foiled every single year, just like the one that got through tragically today in Jerusalem, it becomes clear that there is a terrorist machine that's constantly churning out plots. Hamas is behind many of these plots, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, lone wolf terrorists, all of them together, and they are constantly producing the kinds of threats that we're seeing.
So one of the, you've made an interesting point there about the dozens or hundreds of terror attacks that are foiled. Can you just give us an approximate number off the top of your head for that?
Yeah, I've got the figures right here in front of me because I checked in with security sources earlier today, and I have these numbers completely confirmed. It's from the beginning of this year, from the start of 2022, we've got 330 shooting attacks foiled, 54 stabbing attacks foiled, 34 explosive device attacks like the ones that occurred in Jerusalem today were thwarted, 5 car rammings, 3 kidnappings, and 2 suicide bombings. Those are the numbers just from the start of this year. And of course, that's going to go up. So, when you put that all together, it gives you a sense of, what life would look here, how it would look if this incredible intelligence coverage by the Shin Bet and by the IDF, which translates this intelligence into operations. It's this marriage between high quality intelligence and the ability to act on it, the ability to send counterterrorism units into Jenin, into Nablus, into East Jerusalem, wherever the threat is developing, and to nip it in the bud before it results in the murder of civilians or security forces. That's what usually stops these kinds of attacks. And Israel isn't used to these kinds of bombings. It's been years since this kind of mass casualty bombing has occurred. So obviously it brings up a lot of bad memories, which you've already alluded to. But just the fact that it's rare is not a result of a lack of trying. I think that's really the bottom line here.
So soon enough, in a few minutes, we're going to bring on our colleague, Major General retired Elon Levavi, former Deputy Commissioner of the Israeli National Police, and he'll be talking about this from some different angles. But I want to ask you the following question. You've spoken about the coming of a more right-wing government. Now, Omer Bar-Lev, who is currently the Minister for Internal Security, has had quite an underwhelming term in that capacity, in my opinion. That's my opinion. You may disagree. Tell me if you disagree. I had high hopes for him when he first came in. Obviously, this is a retired colonel in the Israel Defense Forces, formerly the head of Sayeret Matkal, Israel's most elite known military outfit. But it's been a pretty mixed bag, and that's describing it generously. Do you think that while you speak about the successes of the foiling of these terror attacks, do you think that there has been a fundamental failure of Omer Bar-Lev in his capacity of Minister of Internal Security?
I think that Omer Bar-Lev has been facing, honestly, what any public security minister in his capacity would face, which is, and really Alon, there is nobody better placed, in my view, than Alon, who will appear after me to delve into this and to do a real deep dive, if you like. But I think, a lot of the problems that he has faced are due to budgeting, and due to the fact that the Israel police has been severely neglected in terms of its budget. And that has prevented it from being able to deal with, disturbances in mixed cities, like we saw so jarringly during the May 21 wave of rioting and security incidents that washed over the state of Israel. So really, I think when it comes to the police, and Omer Bar-Lev is in charge of the police and of the border police units that are operating within the state of Israel, the budgeting campaign and the budgeting struggle has been at the forefront. Now, what I would say to his credit is that under his watch and under this outgoing government's watch, there has been a move to establish an Israeli National Guard. And yes, it's too small. Yes, there are still many problems, but just the fact that it was established, in my view, is a big deal, because I think that's the beginning of the solution for what needs to be done in terms of, when we're thinking about the next war, and we're thinking about the fact that the IDF is going to be stretched across possibly multiple fronts, to the north, to the south. And on top of all of that, we talk about the scenario of mass rioting and security incidents within the state of Israel. The police on its own, there's no way that it will be able to deal with all of that. A National Guard is what's needed, and the fact that it was established is something I would put to his credit and to this government's credit.
Okay, so Yaakov, we hear a lot of talk, albeit in the midst of ongoing negotiations for the new coalition, that Itamar Ben-Gvir may have a planned position as Minister of Internal Security. Do you think that he will be able to take a firmer position against these acts of terror, or do you think that it will induce greater attempts for terrorist activity against the state of Israel, or do you think there's no correlation between the two?
Well, I think that, the first thing he's going to try and do is to try and get more powers than any minister that preceded him until now. And we've already seen reports about major tensions. And again, maybe this is something that Alon could weigh in on. Major tensions between police brass and Itamar Ben-Gvir's demands to receive more powers, including the ability to deploy officers, to literally deploy them and to decide where they're going to go. These are powers that have always been reserved for the Inspector General, for the police chief. And these are professional decisions, very much like the IDF Chief of Staff is the one who decides what the rules of engagement are. And not the government. Similarly with the police chief is the one who decides based on, the situation assessment and his prioritization and his ability to manage, such a large and complex organization, where forces should be deployed. So this is why Itamar Ben-Gvir is making these demands. He wants more powers. And he's going to be under serious pressure because he has made, very, very ambitious campaign pledges. And as soon as he takes up that position, the pressure will be on him, and he may find out sooner rather than later that reality is extremely complex, and it's one thing to make pledges, and it's quite another to implement them and see them through.
So I've got two last questions for you, Yaakov, and then we're going to bring on General Levavi. The first question is this. There is much made, there has always rightly been much made about the normalization agreements between Israel and the signatories to the Abraham Accords, and that's appropriately venerated and should be, and hopefully will be widened and broadened. But as I said at the time, and as I still say now, without affixing any blame for this at the foot of Israelis or Israeli policymakers, without affixing blame there has been absolutely no breakthrough with regard to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Are we going to see that absent a clear policy on how to resolve or reduce, at the very least reduce, the ongoing Israel-Palestinian conflict, are we going to see this as baked into the story of the state of Israel, these types of attacks?
Well, I mean, that's a very important question. The way I would address that is as follows. The fact that Israel has been able to sign these multiple normalization agreements with the Abraham Accords is a testament to its power, to its military, technological, and economic power, which is growing, its influence in the region, and its ability to stand as the gatekeeper against the radical Iranian Shiite axis. The Sunni countries of this region view Israel as the prime defense against that threat, and that is all to Israel's credit. However, the idea that these can act as substitutes to improving Israel's situation with the Palestinian arena, I would call it, is, in my opinion, a fantasy. And the Palestinian situation remains, in many ways, the most important for Israel's long-term future and for Israel's security. I'm not of the opinion that the conflict can be solved tomorrow, no matter what Israel does. I believe that there are better ways of managing it and worse ways of managing it. And I think the most important thing is that this issue returns to center stage within Israel, and that we stop falling for this illusion that this can be put away in the closet and somehow, nothing is going to happen and we'll be able to get on with our day, because that simply isn't the case.
So the final question is a much more intimate question, if you like. I'm asking you as a friend and also as a colleague, and please just feel free to answer this as you see fit. Look, I well remember, I was in yeshivot in Israel at the time. I well remember the terrible events of the Second Intifada and the detonation of buses and the homicide bombings and the murder of innocents. And I remember the impact that that had not only on the victims, but also the parents of victims and so forth. As a husband, as an Israeli husband, as a father of young Israeli children, does this strike fear into your heart? Does this bring back memories that might change the way in which you undertake your day-to-day activities with regard to your kids? Will you have to, for example, bring your kids together and speak to them about keeping their eyes open, looking around, not standing in certain areas? Will we see Israeli parents divide their kids between different buses on identical bus routes because of the horrific possibility that one might return home, the other one might not? How does it move you as an Israeli husband and father?
Of course, it's a jolt, and it's more than anything else, sadness is the prime emotion that I'm feeling today. Sadness for the family and everything that they're going to have to experience in their process of bereavement, and all of the things that are unimaginable for those who don't experience it. So that's the feeling that's dominating me. Yes, of course, there is a sense of caution and concern for security, but at the same time, I think that the Israeli people are extremely resilient, and one of the things that marks the Israeli home front is its ability to bounce back very quickly. Even as it grieves, it's able to bounce back and return to life as normal. And it's that quality that has prevented terrorists throughout all of these decades from getting their way when it comes to Israelis. And I think it's important to maintain that resilience. And a lot of that resilience is based on the fundamental faith that the people have in the security forces and in the intelligence services. And I think it's going to take more than, these attacks, as horrible as they are, to fundamentally shake that resilience. I don't think we've crossed that line. And I think that, the Israeli people will be bouncing back from this and determined, to get on with their life as only Israelis know how to do after this kind of incident.
Well, Yaakov, thanks very much for your time. Thank you for sitting for interview. Thank you for doing so at this, with very little warning indeed, but I know that you're always the man to weigh in and to provide your perspective. And I hope that we know no further attacks upon Israeli citizens, civilians, children, or frankly, anybody at all. And I hope that we apprehend the perpetrators of this crime very, very swiftly indeed. I'm going to bid you a peaceful rest of your day, and I'm going to turn now to Major General Elon Levavi. Thank you, Yaakov. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know, Major General Levavi served as a combat helicopter pilot in the Israeli Air Force and later served for 34 years in the Israeli National Police. He concluded his service as the Deputy Commissioner of the Israeli National Police in 2019. Among his other duties, he served as Chief of Operations, Chief of Policing, District Deputy, and spokesperson for the Israeli National Police. As head of the Police Operations Division, Levavi was responsible for operational preparedness for a number of scenarios ranging from national emergency situations to day-to-day operational challenges. As head of the Policing Division, he was responsible for the build-up and implementation of the Israeli National Police's capabilities at sea, on land, and in the air. He actually founded the Israeli National Police's Air Force. Levavi also held senior responsibility for the reinforcement and improvement of police relations with minority communities in Israel and for the security of educational and strategic facilities within the country. And he earned his bachelor's in political science and master's of business administration, and is also a graduate of the FBI crisis negotiation course and a graduate of the Wexner Foundation Senior Executive Program at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. He is the head of the National Resilience Department at Ono College in Israel, and I'm very pleased to see you. He's a friend of the organization and he's an expert of the MirYam Institute. How are you, Alon? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, and good evening or good morning to you all.
So I'm sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances, as I said to Yaakov. I'd like to begin by asking you a basic question so that our listeners can understand and our viewers will understand. Alon, tell us why these two areas, these two entrances to Jerusalem, which might seem obvious, but maybe there's more to it. Why were these two areas chosen for the detonation of these bombs? I'm referring to the main entrance to Jerusalem from Givat Shaul and the Ramot Junction, which is another entrance to Jerusalem. Can you tell us why those areas were picked and selected?
Yes, it's almost obvious that the terrorists that put that bombs in the two bus stations, they were looking for mass casualties in this area. Their target is to hurt or to injure or to kill as many people as they can. Doesn't matter if it's kids, women, children, or adults. So that time of the day, it was just after 7 o'clock in the morning, in the entrance of Jerusalem, in a very busy bus stations, it was in their point of view, a very good target. And as you can see the results, 20 casualties, 1 dead. And I'm not sure that it's the end of the bad news about it.
So you're not sure it's the end of the bad news. In other words, you think that there may be further detonations during the course of today?
No, what I mean is that I think that another one from the casualties might be dead in the end of the day, but I'm not sure about it. That's only rumors that I heard.
So, Alon, I'm wondering if there's also an aspect to it. Yes, the mass casualty opportunity for the terrorists. Yes, the opportunity to kill innocent civilians and citizens. But also, is there too much ease of arrival and departure for these terrorists to those particular points geographically?
Absolutely. We will have, or the police and the Shin Bet they will have to check how they got to these places, how they entered the west side of Jerusalem, and how it was so easy for them to come with these bombs, as you said, sophisticated bombs, and put them in these so crowded places. The cross borders between Israel and the West Bank or the East Jerusalem are crowded at this time of the year. Many Palestinians are getting into Jerusalem to work. Israel, in one hand, trying to let these Palestinians to work and to give their families something to eat or to bring some money back home. And on the other end, it's a conflict with the security issues. We're trying to get as much intelligence as we can about these people. But as just Yaakov said, there are so many terror attacks that were avoided. And at this time, we can see that it didn't work. And obviously, we will have to check ourselves.
So Deputy Commissioner of the Israeli National Police, Sigal Bar-Tzvi, said that police suspected an organized cell was behind this attack rather than just one person, or what's sometimes referred to as a lone wolf. She added that there were no specific warnings about Wednesday's attack, but there had been intelligence pointing to planned attacks in Israel in general. And police also raised their level of alert following the attack, according to Bar-Tzvi. So, Alon, what are the intelligence warnings about planned terror attacks in Israel in general that Bar-Tzvi was referring to? And also, can you tell us why, and this is without raising a finger pointing guilt towards the Israeli National Police, I want people to understand this. Can you tell us why the level of alert was raised? If there were warnings, why was it raised only after these two attacks rather than before the two attacks?
You have to understand the reality here in Israel to understand the situation. There is a constant threat of terrorism on the state of Israel. Constant. Every day there are many intelligence pieces that say somebody from somewhere is intent to put a bomb or to stab someone. It's there all the time. Their intention or their goal is to attack and to kill and to injure Israelis every day. The level of intelligence or the quality of intelligence, that's what matters. Sometimes it's just general information or general intel, and sometimes it's very accurate. When it's very accurate, you can see the Shin Bet and the Yamam, the counterterrorism unit, going into Jenin and going into Nablus and going all over and attacking these terrorists at their places. The alert situation, or what Bar-Tzvi just said about the alert situation in Israel, raised after the attack because there was not concrete or special intelligence about these attacks. And it's obvious that after such an attack, you have to put many more police officers in Jerusalem. Thousands of police officers went into Jerusalem and to the Sim line and all to the public areas.
So I asked Yaakov this question, and I'll ask it of you as well. Terror attacks and bombs on and around buses, Alon, these are all reminiscent of one of Israel's most horrific recent chapters, and I'm referring again to the Second Intifada. Do you think that this might be the beginning of another sustained wave of terror, if not an intifada, but a sustained wave of terror, or could it indeed spread to an intifada?
I don't really know. I know that for many months, there are lots of terror attacks, lone wolves, stabbing, shootings, and the army and the Israel police and the special units are fighting this terror wave all over Israel and the West Bank. As you probably know, there is a military operation known as Breakwater that is going on for several months. I'm not sure that we are at the same situation like we were 10 or 15 years ago, where buses were blowing in the streets of Israel. But we have to be very cautious. We have to be with our eyes open. Since the political situation is not stable in Israel for a long time, the terrorists are using this situation and trying to hit Israel in a very, how do you say, in their trying to hit Israel, the kids, the women, and to try to put the Palestinian issue on the table again. And that's the way to do that.
So are you saying, because I asked Yaakov this question, I'd love your perspective as well. Do you believe that there's a correlation between these two attacks and the recent elections in Israel?
It's a process. It's not exactly the election. It's the unstable situation that Israel is suffering from for almost 3 or 4 years. And as you probably saw, we had 5 elections in very few years. And it's a very good playground for terrorists. But we have to say that the army, the Israeli police, and the Shin Bet are fighting the terrorism everywhere with huge success. And we have to say a very good word about that. It's an ongoing war. It's an ongoing operation. It's very difficult. As you probably know, Palestinians are working in Israel. Israelis are living in the West Bank. It's a mixed population. It's a very hard situation, but I think that the security agencies are doing a very good job, even that we saw this terrible terror attack this morning.
You know, Yaakov made mention of the fact that the Israeli National Police is severely under-budgeted. Do you think that that has played a role in this? I mean, it seems to me, I agree with you, the Israeli security forces do an exceptional job. Nothing is 100%, but we do find ourselves here on the day of tremendous tragedy. Is the Israeli National Police an organization that is underfunded and under-resourced?
Absolutely. I'm saying it for many, many years. I think that the Israeli police must be in a different place in the state of mind of the prime minister and all in the government. It's underfunded. There are not enough police officers for doing all the police duties. You have to understand, and maybe the audience here must understand, that the Israeli police is unique. In 1974, Israel police got all the responsibility for the internal security issues, which is unique all over the world. In Israel, police in charge of fighting crime, in fighting against drugs, car accidents, all the classic police duties. And on top of that, the Israeli police in charge of the internal security, fighting terrorism, and dealing with all the issues that the civilian front is having during military operations, like missile attacks and so on, riots in the mixed cities and so on. That's all a police duty here in Israel. The Israeli police is 31,000 police officers, and it's not enough. The budget is not enough. We have to, I think a very good step was building the Israeli National Guard that is part of the border police, but it's not enough. It's only the first step.
So in the United States, as you'll know, you're very familiar with the United States of America, and you're familiar with law enforcement and counter-terror work in the US. There is a counter-terror campaign in areas of public transport which makes an appeal to commuters. And it says, quote, if you see something, say something. In other words, if a commuter sees something that doesn't look quite right, they should report it to the authorities. And I have always felt that due to the relatively good circumstances that most Americans find themselves in, they simply don't have the wherewithal to identify whether or not something ought to be reported. Now, without, again, in any way placing responsibility for this dreadful attack on the shoulders of anyone but the attackers, Alon, is it possible that Israelis have become a little bit too lax and too relaxed when it comes to checking our immediate surroundings? Are we likely to see public awareness campaigns intensified in return within the state of Israel?
I think it's a very good question and a comment. And the answer is yes. I think that we had very good years, very secure years in the past 10 or 15 past years. And now we will have to recalculate and re-educate the public. We have to say again, if you see something, say something. Call 100, which is the 911, the Israeli 911 emergency line. But as Yaakov said, the Israeli resilience is unbelievable. You'll see that after 1 hour, everything was clean in the scene. The 2 bus stations went back to work. Buses are driving, people are going everywhere. And I think that's what makes the Israel special. Everything go back to normal in a matter of hours. But you're right, we have to re-educate and we have to say again, if you see something, say something, don't hesitate, call 100. And yeah, there were very good 15 years, and now we are facing new reality.
So what measures do you think concretely will be undertaken by the Israeli National Police in the wake of these attacks? How are they going to crack down on this? How will they avert this becoming a new trend, these remotely detonated explosive devices? What can we expect to see? How will they operate?
I think it's, first of all, I think that we will see a joint effort between Israel, the Shin Bet, and the army to gather as much as intelligence that we can, to gather as much as information that we can about what happened, how it happened. That's in the intelligence channel and the investigation channel. We are, as you probably saw on television, the Israeli police collected all the items from the scene, all the evidence from the scene, and now they are conducting an investigation, trying to figure out who built the bombs, who designed the electronic devices, and so on. That's on the investigation intelligence channel. On the operational channel, which I was in charge for many years, if I was the operational head of the police, I would say that I would deploy hundreds more police officers to Jerusalem, first of all, to bring back the sense of security for the civilians with uniforms in the streets of Jerusalem, trying to bring a message that we have to live our life and keep our routine life again. I would send police officers to East Jerusalem, try to calm everything down, because there is a interaction between East Jerusalem and West Jerusalem all the time. I would say that, as they say already, they blocked the entrance from the West Bank to Jerusalem. I'm sure it will take a few days until we will understand what happened, and then everything will go back to normal, but with our eyes open and many more police officers on the cross borders. This is mainly, you will see many more police patrol cars on the streets. You will see soldiers and police officers in the bus stations to give the people, again, the sense of security, just to act normal. And probably in the media, we will hear, as you said before, if you see something, say something, bringing the message of getting the alert high again.
So I just have a couple of final questions for you. I know you have a hard stop at the top of the hour, and I also want to bring in some of the audience questions as well before we have to end the conversation. Look, Elon, there was an assessment, albeit by unnamed active security officials in Israel, that stated that the attackers operated independently and were not guided by a handler in a larger terror group. There were no immediate claims of responsibility, as you know, but Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have celebrated these attacks. I also read that the terrorists remotely detonated the first bomb after ensuring that there were people standing within its range. And then they did the very same with the second device. So my first question to you is, who do you believe is behind the attack? I mentioned to Yaakov, Ron Ben Ishai, who's known to you, said that he believes it's ISIS. Yaakov believes it's the PFLP. Do you have any insight into who you think might be responsible for these attacks?
No, I think that everything that we will say in this moment will be just a speculation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a responsible thing to say who is in charge now, and it will be, we will know sooner or later who is in charge of this terror attack, and they will pay the price for killing Israelis and injured Israelis in terror attacks. The long hand of Israel will get them wherever they are. They can be sure of that. And as you said, their target is to kill as many as Israelis they can. And that's the difference between Israelis and the terrorists. Israel is a responsible country. When we are going to an army campaign against the Gaza Strip, for example, we are letting them, and we want to, let's say, launch a missile to hit some command post of the Hamas. We are letting them know that we are hitting this building ahead of time to let the kids go out of the kindergarten that they are hiding behind him. So that's the difference between Israel and terrorists. They have no boundaries, they have no limits, and that's a huge difference, and we will get them.
So I know you may or may not want to comment on this, but I'll just, in response to what you said, you made mention of the fact that these people will pay the price for killing Israelis, and I agree, and I'm sure that that will be the case. What I want to be sure of is that they won't be rewarded for killing Israelis by way of Israel acceding or agreeing to their demands, for example, for a state in Judea and Samaria. I don't think that it's appropriate that we see terror bring a softness from the Israeli government or from Israel's leaders. I do hear it very, very often. I've heard the Minister of Internal Security say in the past that all of this is because of Israel's policies in Judea and Samaria. We surely mustn't surrender to these types of terror attacks and give ground to the demands of the Palestinian Arabs as a result. Do you agree?
I totally agree. I will not say anything which is political, but I can tell you that it's not a political issue. Mm-hmm. If terrorists hit and kill your kids, you will get them. And it doesn't matter if it's a left wing or right wing, it doesn't matter. I think the policy in Israel that runs for many, many years is that despite our, different opinions between right and left, there is one thing that we are all agree about, is the security of Israel, the security of the people of Israel, and the idea that if someone is killing your civilians, you will get him, you will destroy his house, and you will find him, and either you will, he will pay the price.
So I have a couple of questions for you from our listeners. The first one comes from New York, and he asks whether there are any methodologies that the Israeli National Police can implement which can reach the hearts and minds of the Palestinian Arab population, also the Israeli Arab population, in light of what went on during the riots that took place in Operation Guardian of the Walls. Does the Israeli National Police undertake measures to get to the hearts and minds of Palestinian Arabs and also Israeli Arabs?
I'm not sure that I understood the question. Sorry.
So the question is, given that we don't know who has perpetrated these attacks today, we've dealt with different types of attacks. We've dealt with attacks that are deployed under the banner of an organization such as Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad or whomever. We've also dealt with lone wolf attacks. We deal with a range of attacks. Is there anything, and we have counter-terror measures, operational counter-terror measures, some of which you've spoken about. Are there any measures that the Israeli National Police undertake or the Israeli security forces undertake in order to penetrate the hearts and minds of people who might commit these crimes against Israelis? Is there any direct, maybe it's covert, maybe it's overt, but is there any direct outreach?
Many years ago, I was the deputy commander of the crisis negotiation unit. And it was in the middle of the second intifada, where hundreds of suicide bombers penetrated Israel and blew themselves up in buses, schools, whatever. At that time, we conducted a research that tried to understand the profile of the suicide bomber. Who is the person that is getting up in the morning somewhere in the Nablus or Jenin, put on themselves an explosive belt and push the trigger in the middle of a bus? We try to investigate, we try to make a psychological research. We had our conclusions about it, but I can tell you that it's very difficult. We can see lots of terrorists that are getting up in the morning because of a fight with their parents or because of stupid other things, because they are neglected or whatever. They are just going to one of the cross borders with a knife, pulling the knife and trying to stab a police officer. It's like suicide by cop. That's the terminology in the US, I believe. So it's very difficult. We are trying to monitor the social media, for example, to understand if there are people there that are saying things that maybe it's a clue about things that they are going to do. It's very complicated. We are trying to do so. Actually, we have lots of success doing that. But as you can see, sometimes it's not 100% success.
Last couple of questions, Elon, not directly on this point, but this question comes from Chicago. There have been recent headlines about arms smuggling within the Arab community and the Bedouin community, thefts from army bases. There was a terrible theft that took place, shocking theft that took place recently from IDF bases, and also a growth of Hamas's presence in Eastern Jerusalem. And indeed, I'll broaden that out to Judea and Samaria more broadly. How well equipped are we to overcome this?
As you probably know, I'm also a helicopter pilot, and from once in a while, I'm flying, trying to catch these smugglings from Jordan, sometimes from Egypt, sometimes from Lebanon. You have to understand that the border between Israel and the Arab countries, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, and Egypt, is very long, and it's very easy to throw something from one side of the border to the other. There are lots of efforts that are putting in a joint venture between the Israeli police force, special units, and the IDF. We had huge success in the past 2 years. It's also a combination of intelligence and people on the ground along the borders. It's a long issue. The theft from the Israeli, from the IDF bases is terrible. While I was the head of operations, we had a joint venture with them trying to secure the weapons, the bombs, the explosives that are in their bunkers with all kind of technology. It sounds ridiculous, but it's sometimes it's reckless. It's just out there, and it's very easy to take ammunition from these places which are in the field. But I know that the Israeli IDF is doing huge effort to try to avoid this incidents in the future.
Alon, I'll finish with one question. I don't know whether you're able to answer it, or maybe you can find the way of answering it in a manner that doesn't put you into conflict. It's not final yet, but there is a possibility that Itamar Ben-Gvir will become the Minister of Internal Security. How do you see Ben-Gvir's abilities to work well with the Israeli National Police? I think there's always a lot of rhetoric during any political campaign. Then there's the reality of governance. We never know how much of either of those two will carry over. But how do you see that working?
As you know me for many years, and you know that I'm not taking any political side, but I can tell you two simple things. Israel is a democracy, and the Israeli police will work with every minister that the government will decide that will be the Minister of Internal Security. That's one. Second, I think for the sake of the democracy in Israel, we have to keep the independence of the police. It's crucial for very complicated investigations, for investigating public figures, as you call it, white collars. So it's crucial for the democracy that the police will stay independent, the commissioner will stay independent, and he will not be influenced by political issues in his decisions.
Okay, well, thank you, Alon. We really appreciate you giving us the insight today. It's a difficult day. I know that you have a personal celebration this evening, and I wish you and your family Mazal Tov. But of course, we're all very sorry to be convening under these circumstances. And I know that our listeners and our viewers could not hear from a better expert than you. You are the individual that we immediately thought of when we wanted to bring about this briefing. And I hope that there will be no further attacks and we won't have to reconvene soon enough. And your expectation that this may not be the end of the fatalities, I hope is proven wrong, but I fear it might be proven correct. And most importantly, we will prevail, and resilience will carry the day. And maybe on a slight high note, Mazal Tov, if I can divulge it, I believe it's your birthday. So yes. Wonderful, and have a wonderful evening with your family, and let's all be safe. And may Israel know no more pain. Thank you to you, thank you to our listeners, and thank you to my colleagues at the MirYam Institute, Rosita Plini, and to Alan Langer. We appreciate all of you. Thank you very much indeed.